maybe you can walk through example of a multi-day launch, what you think, you all did well, and some of the very specific plays.
First, even before the launch, I'm a really big fan of like early access, testing, beta testing, anything you can do to get some early feedback, get some eyeballs on it, but also you'll hopefully get some good messaging. You'll get to see maybe test out messaging with your beta users, just get their first reactions to it. And you'll probably, what they say is probably gonna be much better messaging than anything you could come up with. Just like go ask your customers, what did they think about the product? Like how is it gonna solve something in their day-to-day? And go pick up on those themes and use that for the actual launch. For actual launch, I actually usually do launches in like 2 weeks. So it'll be a combination of posting on LinkedIn organically. That's a channel that works really well for us. We have a B2B SaaS audience. Again, telling the story of like, why did we launch this? Why now? What did we learn from launching this? What did we learn because we did beta testing that we did wrong and that we fixed since we previously launched? Like, people also love a good, like, we did this wrong at first. This is what we've learned.
I love that. Especially if it's genuine.
Exactly.
And you have to be a little vulnerable, right? Which I think is hard.
Yeah, you have to admit that you probably messed something up.
Yeah.
And I think some people are like, whoa, if I tell people that my product that's brand new isn't perfect, they're not going to buy it. No, because everyone knows that you're not going to launch the exact perfect thing the first time.
Totally. It's such a good reminder. Well, I am so happy to have you with us today, Natalie. I was thinking back to how we met, and I have to thank our very good friend, Ryan Narod, for introducing us. And I remember us getting coffee a few months back, and I basically asked you just like a ton of questions, just like a talking sponge. I was like, please tell me everything you know about marketing. And I just loved how both strategic and tactical you are, which I feel like is really rare in this field. I then also went back and looked at our emails, and I, for some reason, followed up with that New York City bodega.
Oh my God.
Instagram
No, I
account.
was going to tell you, that's one of my favorite like Insta posts I get now. I watch all of them. I watch all the cats. I was going to bring that up.
But I was like, what led us to me following up? Did we talk about Instagram accounts?
I think we were talking about like fun tying in content with New York, like kind of that was more of a a fun influencer way, but like how could we do that in B2B?
Dude, plug for that account, honestly, if they want to sponsor the drafting table, because I watch it religiously.
It's just like every single time it does not fail, and I love seeing all the different types of cats and their personalities,
the different neighborhoods and different owners.
Yeah, I feel like I learn something, but I mostly just learn about the cats. It was a great follow.
We're going to turn this into a cat show. Awesome. Well, so I've been following you very, very aggressively on LinkedIn ever since then. I'm pretty sure I like every single one of your posts. This is like so like parasocial, right? Where I'm like, just follow you. And I just want to say again, like I'm such a huge fan of everything you put out. I think it's so authentic. It's so genuine. And that's why I'm so pumped to have you with us today at the drafting table. So let's dive in, if that works for you.
Let's do it.
So I always kick off our pod with this question, which is, what do you think is the one thing founders should know how to do before they start a company? Knowing that there's endless amounts of things. But you've worked with so many founders now in marketing roles across different sizes of companies. And so if we were to pick one thing that we could talk about today, what would that be?
So this is going to sound like kind of like cliche advice that I'm sure every founder's heard, but I'd say to have a really good story. And it's going to tie into what we talk about today, so that's part of it. But I just hear so many people, like, I don't know if you get this. I'm sure you get this all the time, of people pitching you random startup ideas, like not just formally, but like your friends or random people you meet. Yeah. And a lot of times the reason is, well, it's a good idea. I think it's going to make money. I'm like, but startups are really hard and positioning's really hard. And it makes it a lot easier if you have a clear, concise story you can tell that's like, I did this because I experienced this need, or I worked at this company and actually we wish we had this product, so we solved it. In every single marketing campaign you do down the line, if you have a clear mission that you actually relate to, it's not just like made up, it will make it so much easier.
I really love that. And I think you're so spot on. I think there's so many frameworks and guides out there on how to pitch your company. And I think you're totally right. People kind of forget like a human element of the story goes a long way. And I think especially since you and I both work in B2B SaaS, right, that can be challenging at times because sometimes you're talking about some very deep tech and sometimes the buyers are not like so accessible and so forth. So maybe we can spend time today talking about specifically product launches, right, and how and when and if, let's say, a seed founder is launching their product for the first time or a new product, what they should do, like very tactically speaking.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into the tactics, but I think that's why I wanted to start with this story, because at the end of the day, I'm doing a lot more product launches now. I'm thinking about it more, and whether or not they do well so often comes down to if there's a good story behind it. I might be sneak peeking some future advice, but
Yes, I'd love to hear it. Well, let's start there. I guess I'm curious, when you say story, is it that a user can use a product better, that there is something that fundamentally changes how the end user or customer interacts with our product?
I think it's getting beyond, just to your point, like faster, better. I actually have a rule in marketing where I try not to use like adjectives like that too much, like quickly, speedily, easily. Like it's so easy just to throw those in.
Yes.
But that's a side tangent there. I think really what it comes down to is a story of like, again, like here's a customer I actually talked to. Here's the pain that they're experiencing. And ideally, you'd have the customer tell the story, not you. But like, here was something I experienced in my day today. Here's out of the company how we listened, and here's how we actioned on it. So rather than being, okay, we built this 2.0 product that works faster than ever, it could say, we talked to our customers and they found that the longest part of their day was logging notes manually or having to like summarize all the notes from meetings. So rather than AI just saying like, now AI can summarize it for you, you could tell a story of a customer who saved like 30 minutes that they now have. I feel like the common thing you hear is like maybe they have with their family or to do other work because they don't have to type that in by hand. So more just like, honestly, it comes down to framing it less about yourself and more about the person you're solving it for.
Yeah, I actually love your kind of rules, right? It's just like, it's so easy to just say easier, faster, better. I see a lot of people using numbers a lot. Like, we are 4x better, right? But I'm kind of like, well, 4x better than what, right? Than what was maybe 1x, right? So what are your thoughts on using numbers and ROI?
Numbers, I think, are great if they're specific. And again, ideally, like you could get a customer to say the number. I don't think numbers that are just like 5x better, 10 times, like if you can cite the source, but better yet, like with a lot of launches, or I actually do this a lot with partnerships. Like this is a big thing you do in SaaS is you launch an integration with another SaaS company. And a lot of times, again, it's just like, we're now partnering up together. We're now 2 times faster because we work together. Why not go get a co-customer? Because ideally, if you did an integration, you should have co-customers who requested that integration.
Yeah.
Get them to say an exact, and even if you don't like have ROI numbers, just like get a quote from them being like, this is why I'm excited about this integration. This is how I'm going to use it my day to day. Ideally, they have a result. But I think the more specific you can be, and rather than high level ROI numbers, like even if it just saved them like 5 minutes a day, that is something someone really tangible can latch onto. Versus ROI, sometimes I think there's a time and place for it, but sometimes it feels too high level where it's like, okay, but how is this actually going to help me in my day to day?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, on the websites you see now, it's like the big numbers. And again, like, I think it looks flashy, but from an actual customer perspective, it is sometimes hard to relate that back to your actual day-to-day use, right?
Yeah, and I think it's oftentimes those numbers are more for the buyers and the users. And again, there's a time and place. Like if you're doing an RFP or like you have to really prove out to a big enterprise why they should even start looking at you, sometimes you do just need those ROI numbers. But if you're trying to sell the end user, also including stats for them, that shows them, again, like this is why I'm excited to use this product, not just why my buyers or my boss is excited for me to buy it.
I'm so glad you distinguish between the two, because that is, again, for all listeners who are B2B SaaS, they can appreciate that those are not always the same two people. Oftentimes there's actually different champions and buyers and users and signers, et cetera, right? And so when you think about messaging for a buyer versus a user, and again, maybe let's going back to like specifically in this scenario, like a product launch, do you really feel like the primary, I guess, message recipient should be the user?
For the most part, I'd caveat if you're doing like a very enterprise or like ABM specific campaign where you're going after very like high value target accounts, larger enterprises, and you do need to just get in front of the buyer, then you might want to go after the actual buyers. But I think for the average product launch, especially early days when I don't know too many software companies that are starting off selling to like really big Fortune 500s. Congrats if you're one of them. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you need to get the end users excited about it, because even if you're not a PLG motion, like it still helps if you have the fans raving internally, like I want to use this product over this one.
Yeah.
And I've seen more and more in buying cycles that like ease of use is such an important criteria, because no one wants to use software or buy software no one's going to use. So a lot of times like the champions might have more of a sway than the actual, like, what we used to think of before as like the decision maker or the buyer. Because if the champions who's going to use it, it's just like, I don't like this, I don't like the UI, or this messaging didn't resonate with me, I don't get it, then it's going to get cut off at the beginning.
Yeah. No, that's so spot on. And I think oftentimes, I think people prioritize a DM over the user because they're like, well, they're the ones making, signing off on the sale, when really it's almost counterintuitive. It's like the champion who loves your product is the one advocating for it inside, right?
And I think there's room for both, but when you're thinking about like who should my main audience be for this big product launch that is more, and I try to view product launches more of like, how do I get people excited and fandom and audience, not just like, how do I inform this exact buyer that my product now exists?
Totally.
Like when you think of more like mass market, like a launch, that's when I think ultimately you want the user to be more excited. Because also like users are the ones who are probably more active on all those channels looking for ways to solve their problems. Like buyers aren't spending as much time, I don't know, I think on all these different social channels or on Product Hunt or trying to find something to solve their day-to-day.
Absolutely.
They have someone who can do that for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think we can then, I guess, go to a very specific scenario, which is, imagine if you're a seed stage B2B SaaS founder, right? You've built this awesome product. You're super excited to get it onto the world. You want to make a big splash. You might already have a few customers, but you want more. And I think we can maybe break it down to 3 chapters almost, right? Like, what do you do before the launch and all the prep work that goes into it? And I think that's where most of the magic goes down, right? Then during the launch, I think some of the specific plays that you've seen work really well. And then, of course, the post-launch. I guess just to even kick off on the before launch, it goes back to your point about maybe the expectations, right? It sounds like what you're saying is like the point of a launch is to get users super amped up on your product and just like love it and be huge champions for it. I actually think maybe perhaps founders that I know have worked with in the past see it as a way to generate leads, right? And that's perhaps why they're like, let me get to the DM. And so it's all about, I think, expectation, really management, right? And like, what do we really realistically think we can get out of a product launch? And so I'm really curious, obviously as a marketing leader, you've probably worked with founders and CEOs who have said, oh, I want this product launch to generate 500 qualified leads, right? And I'm so curious, like, do you see that happen always day one, right? And then we can kind of break it down from there.
So a good launch, spoiling, I don't think should happen in a day. So you probably won't see it in day one.
Love it. I love a good spoiler alert.
But I think to your point, like I think we have this bad idea in marketing sometimes that it's like, oh, if this is a demand gen or an affinity campaign, like if this is building fans, it won't bring me leads. Every time we do a launch that's very fan driven or that's very much more like educational versus just like, hey guys, we have this cool new thing, it still brings in leads. Like at the end of the day, I'm still responsible for pipeline at my company. I still need to be delivering. But it shouldn't be surprising that if you create this really great story that people are following along, and again, I like to have it be like multiple days and that you learn things a little more. And maybe some posts are a little more enablement. Some are a little more of the story and the mission driven. Then people will be like, oh, wait, I do have that problem. Oh, they'll remember it. It might be in the moment or down the line, be like, I do have that problem. I want to sign up for that product now. Versus if it's just, I think when we think lead gen, sometimes we're so tempted to be like, well, all my posts have to list every single cool feature in this product because that's what's going to get someone excited and get them to buy. But it's like, no, we can also incorporate into there a little bit of like storytelling or education or exact use case. It doesn't all just need to be the pitch all at once to get leads.
Absolutely. No, and going back to, I mean, it is perhaps, again, counterintuitive. Maybe it's obvious to you, but yeah, product launches do not need to be confined to one day, and perhaps one day is not even realistic anymore, right? And so maybe you can walk through example of a multi-day launch, what you think, you all did well, and some of the very specific plays.
Yeah, I think first, even before the launch, I'm a really big fan of like early access, testing, beta testing, anything you can do to get some early feedback before the big launch day for a few different reasons. I mean, obviously, just like to my story earlier, when we launched something that maybe wasn't ready, to prevent that from happening, like get some eyeballs on it. But also, you'll hopefully get some good messaging. You'll get to see maybe test out messaging with your beta users, right? If you have some customers who you can go to first and just get their first reactions to it. And you'll probably, what they say is probably going to be much better messaging than anything you could come up with. And if you hear some repeat themes, when you think about what should my story be, that's how you can base it off of. It doesn't have to be based off of some like random thing you make up in a vacuum. Just like go ask your customers, what did they think about their product or about the product? Like, how is it going to solve something in their day to day? And go pick up on those themes and use that for the actual launch. So first, if you can, beta early. I've done not for like product launches, but for reports. I've done early access campaigns before. That's really helpful again to see like what are the parts that people are really resonating with? What are people telling me like this is so cool versus maybe what's something they're not mentioning, which obviously didn't resonate as much. Yeah. And then for actual launch, I actually usually do launches in like 2 weeks. So it will be a combination of posting on LinkedIn organically. That's a channel that works really well for us. We have a B2B SaaS audience. I think there's a lot of other social channels that might work well for other founders. But very organic, narrative-driven posts that I can go into a few templates into that later. But again, telling the story of like, why did we launch this? Why now? What did we learn from launching this? What did we learn because we did beta testing that we did wrong and that we fixed since we previously launched? Like, people also love a good, like, we did this wrong at first. This is what we've learned.
I love that. Especially if it's genuine.
Exactly.
And you have to be a little vulnerable, right? Which I think is hard.
Yeah, you have to admit that you probably messed something up. And I think some people are like, whoa, if I tell people that my launch, my product that's brand new isn't perfect, they're not going to buy it. No, because everyone knows that you're not going to launch the exact perfect thing the first time.
Totally. It's such a good reminder. And I love what you said about sometimes listening to what the customers say about you. It's funny because, Workbench as an enterprise software VC fund, we have investors, we have founders, and actually hearing how others talk about us is actually almost the best way to do messaging. I'm always like, let me write that down. How you described us is so much better than whatever I just said, right? And I think, again, hopefully if your customer gets value, right, they can articulate it sometimes in even better ways than you can.
I think the reason it's better is because they're not going to use the weird jargon that you feel forced to use.
Yes.
Like talking about the easily or quickly. It's something, I think it's because we've seen too many past examples, or it's just like we need it to sound snappy. Like we think it has to like catch someone's eye and be like, whoa, it's this word, it suddenly made me feel something. But the best messaging is always so simple because it really speaks to you like a conversation. And I think I often find that my customers can say it simpler than I can because I almost have a little bit that lens of like, it's so cool. I have to describe it in such a cool way.
Totally. 100%. And so let's say, again, all the work really before launch happens before. And so you'll go to a customer, you'll be like, hey, can I grab some time with you? I'd love to just chat about how your experience with our product has been. And so you're not necessarily testing specific language for the launch. You're just doing actually what you should be doing all the time, which is like talking to the customer, getting feedback.
Generally, for some like message testing, I've sometimes thrown out like, how do you resonate with like this versus this? If you have some ideas, like you can always ask them like what resonates with you more. But really, I think early days, I'm more trying to listen to craft my messaging. Like you don't want to come in with too much bias or else then you're just going to hear what you want to hear. More just be like, how would this help you in your day-to-day? How would this solve time? And on my end too, I'm not always on those calls, but I know sales and CS are doing those calls. So I will like watch those recordings. Oftentimes, like one thing I've been trying more of is like feeding a bunch of recordings into AI, telling me what was a moment of delight that you heard from the user. And please quote it exactly because we know that AI likes to make quotes.
Yeah, wow. I love that use case though. And they can pinpoint exactly the specific kind of time mark.
I think it can sometimes tell if someone sounds like really excited or use a word that makes it sound excited. I've also tried to ask it like, what's a moment where maybe someone lost interest or someone, it sounded like they were upset or not as interested. Again, obviously AI is only so good, but I found that helps if you take like a bunch of recordings and then really can sum it down to like, oh, these are the bullet points and those are the things that someone got really excited about. And then I'll go and watch the recording itself, but just so I don't have to sift through the whole thing.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a great pro tip. Okay, so you've gone and done the really important and hard work of talking to your customers and listening to what they're saying, and then going back and distilling that into the actual messaging, right? Which again, like, I think people just go straight to, well, when we launch, we're going to post on LinkedIn. But it's like, you got to know what to post on LinkedIn, right? And so are you doing kind of even internal testing where your team is drafting up some copy, you're kind of workshopping with each other, right? Like who makes that final call on what it all looks and sounds like?
Yeah, usually we're doing some message testing. Like I might take a first stab and then I'll usually run it by my CEO, especially there's like some products if he's more involved in, or I will always try to loop in someone who is actually talking to those prospects or customers. So whether it's like someone on the sales team, getting their feedback on that messaging and if what I'm writing resonates with what they're hearing. And then we'll probably go through a few round of edits. Like I've never once gotten messaging right on the first time. Kudos to anyone who has, but I almost always need to like just get something on paper, get critiques on it, even if it's bad. And I'll say, like, I'm like, this was my first draft. Like, please, it's probably not good. Like, make edits. And then after a few rounds is where we'll get something we feel more comfortable with.
Awesome. And you draft basically post for 12 days straight.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
So part of like learning and iterating is I will not necessarily post every day. If I'm doing 2 weeks, I'd probably do like 4 or 5 posts. Okay. Trying to break it up, and it might not all be me. Like some of those posts might be from my founders. We do have like an advisor program at Navattic, so some of them might be from our advisors. Some might be, hopefully, if we can get some early beta customers to also talk about it. But I actually usually draft like the first few. But what I also really like about the advisor program is I can see, like they're going to take a little bit of twist on something than I would. And I'll see what messaging resonates well across their posts. And then I'll use that to inform like my 3rd or 4th post. So again, even throughout the process, keeping it iterative, because even if I did all that message testing before and did all that work, sometimes like the way you format something on LinkedIn makes it catchier or makes someone pay attention to it more. Or honestly, like, I'm not the first person to say this, but LinkedIn comments are always a goldmine. So you do the first post and you see what questions people have or like what their follow-ups are or their thoughts. And then you do another post that answers those questions or summarizes some interesting thoughts. And then you can even maybe like call out the people who asked them and get them more involved. So it helps to have like a structure of like, okay, this is what I think I'm going to post about. But I'd also argue that like, it's probably going to be better if you are iterative and see what people like during the actual campaign.
I think that's such a great pro tip. And again, I think almost the iterative part is kind of scary because you're like, well, I guess let's test it and see how it goes and then we'll change it. But you're right. I mean, I think you have to react and see what the response is. And then it gives you opportunity to also kind of sharpen the pencil a little bit too.
And it's funny because you say scary, but in my mind, I'm like, oh, if I just answer questions that a bunch of people had in the comments, this post is probably going to do well versus something I just like made up in a vacuum.
Totally.
So in my mind, and I think I'm just like a pretty like iterative experiment person. I'm not always like I try to be a good planner. I'm not always the best. So I always
yeah, exactly.
I find it like less scary to be like, we're going to learn as we go out. But I could see if someone is like more planner type A, that might sound a little scary.
Totally. And I think sometimes it's you know, the reality is like we've all seen product launches. I think there are some that when they're done really well, they really grab you. There's something that makes you want to actually click into the LinkedIn post. And then there are others that you can clearly tell, okay, well, this is a list of new features. And then that's that, right? And so, you know, I think it's finding what that balance is. And especially with the work we do at Workbench, we work with a lot of technical founders. They're building very technical products, which to be fair, like have a lot of really interesting features that, you know, took a long time to build and was really hard to get out, right? But I do think the story sometimes is missing. I guess my question is if you think about like even that first post to like really kick off the launch per se, do you think it's a blend of, hey, mix in the customer story, include a little bit of ROI, have a few like, you know, feature mentions, right? Like how does it not become this like Frankenstein of a LinkedIn post?
I see what you're saying. That's a lot to fit in at once. And this is the way I like to do it. I think I like to start with the why. And I want to clarify that like it's not like you shouldn't show your product. I actually work for a company where our whole messaging is show your product.
I know, and we need to talk about that. We need to talk about Navattic, yeah.
But I think it's just the first initial post, and the thing that's missing from a lot of these launches are a little bit more of the why, and then you can weave that into the product messaging later. So to get a little more tactical about it, the first post I usually do, I really like the behind the scenes post. So this year we launched a freemium version of our product. That was our big product launch of the year. We spent 9 months behind the scenes testing all that. And our first post was, we have been 3 years of sales led at Navattic. We just went product led and spent the last 9 months doing it. This is why. So the first post was very why driven. We did not mention like, we might have had one line that includes a few things that's in that free product, but it was very much like, why? But that first post is just to get someone hooked into the narrative. Like they want to keep reading when you post, and I'll tease at the end, usually being like, I know for the next few days, I'm going to talk more about like why we did this and what we decided to include or not. And then when I talk about what to include, I'm throwing in features in there. It's not like I'm not mentioning those features. I'm just not framing it as a list of, hey, here are 5 things that are included in this new freemium.
Totally.
So I think that's what I mean by storytelling. It doesn't mean that you can't later show some of those customer examples or ROI numbers. I think the first post, though, is why should someone like follow along the story? What can you do to hook them in? And then give specifics and examples. And even like ideally get a raving fan to show off all the cool features.
I mean, I love your drip where you're like, more to come, follow here. I'm always like, oh my gosh. So I think you guys do that really, really well. The behind the scenes, so tactical. Okay, so that's post 1. I guess when you think about post 2 or post 3, do you have additional guidelines? Or, I know we've talked about videos before. I've seen some amazing customer testimonials, maybe even a few more specific tactical plays.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned this a few times, but we did this thing called the customer show and tell at our last events. And it was a customer talking for like 10, 15 minutes about a very specific use case of how they use Navattic. I didn't give them like too much guidance. I just said, talk about what was the problem generally that you were trying to solve, how you done in the past, and how you do it with Navattic. But it was someone who was like clearly a power user. So again, get that power user, not necessarily champion. And they just like nerded out. Then you could tell like they were so excited to talk about it. They were proud of what they did. The campaigns were awesome. So I think you could easily do that for like a second or third product launch, which is why you should also beta test because you're going to get those super fans and nerds. So have them maybe show their screen, record a quick video of them building it out. And then this is where we like to use like interactive demos, obviously, is be like, okay, this is maybe either do a like in-depth playbook. And in there, you could include a little demo showing exactly how you can replicate what that customer did. And honestly, I stole this from Mutiny. So shout out our friend Ryan.
Yeah.
They have such good like example playbooks made from customers. And I think that is such a good like second, third follow-up because it's, hey, we launched this product. This is why. Now hear from one of our customers specifically how they did it and like how they resonate with this why. But like in a very tactical way of them literally going into the product, showing it off, sharing the little nuanced details of how they implemented it. Like people love that type of like in-depth stuff as well once they've been hooked by the story.
Yeah, it's funny because I think for some reason companies just think, oh, well, we have team members who can demo the product, so therefore we should do it. But you're totally right. I mean, if it comes from the customer demoing, it's the same demo, to be honest, but it's just so much more powerful and real, right?
Yeah, and you can do a combination. Like you can have the customer show off parts of it, like you can have them tell their story, and then you can also create a demo, like a nice, clean version of the demo that's like, hey, this is exactly how you do what the customer just showed you. Maybe just going into a little more like how to versus maybe the customer did.
Yeah, I love that. And anything else? I guess any other kind of very specific, this worked really well for us?
Trying to think. I think another thing I mentioned, like we have our advisors.
Yes.
Just if you can get different voices and don't limit them to too strict of a launch campaign template. Like I think we've all seen those launches on LinkedIn where, and I think there is like, my style is a little more free-flowing, learn from it. I've seen really organized launches that also work well, but I think we all sometimes see those launches where it's like 10 people post the exact same thing.
I know.
It just doesn't feel as visually interesting or as enticing. And so if you can get multiple people, even at your company, if you can't get like advisors or influencers, because then you're going to see different ways to position things that you wouldn't have thought about. And then if one of theirs does really well, then you can have your own spin on that post and post that later and like reap the rewards from that messaging. So I don't have like one specific template, but I would just argue try to get multiple templates and multiple ways to position this.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally A/B testing, right? And be like, oh, actually, I didn't think about positioning like that or that language.
Yeah, there are so many times where I think I thought of every use case for an interactive demo or every way to frame it. And then one of our advisors will talk about a new use case or a way it's interesting. I was like, I would have never thought of that.
Yeah, I love that. Do you want to talk a little bit about, again, the advisors you have? Because I do think that's unique. And I think a lot of early stage companies do have advisors, maybe formally or informally. But I think the way you guys do it is like, and how you've tapped into them and kind of put them to work is actually really, really thoughtful.
Yeah, I honestly have had to look back at one thing I was like most proud of at Navattic. It'd probably be our advisor program. So I'm always happy to talk about it. Essentially, it's a mix of what most people would think of as advisors, where they do give me feedback on my marketing. They are all, so it's like 15 B2B SaaS marketing experts. They have different area of expertise. Some are like ABM, some are PLG, some are product marketing, some are content. So they are all like brilliant marketers who do help me in my day-to-day. But on the other side, they're all people who we saw our audience followed and have engagement with. So they also act a little bit of like, I hate saying B2B influencers or all that, but a little bit where they'll promote our content, obviously be a part of these campaigns. But what works really well is because they're actual advisors and because they are privy to the product, all of them were either past customers, current customers, or they're like, a lot of them are consultants. So it's like their customers are customers. And I will loop them into big product updates. I will have sometimes like product feedback sessions with them. We will have go-to-market feedback sessions with them. So they're like very privy to the company, and most have been around for like 2 or 3 years now. So when they post about us, it's almost like an employee posting with that level of knowledge. And I think when I talk about like the in-depth narrative of all these campaigns, I know that if I give them a template, but then give them freedom, I'm like, I know they're going to do a great job because it's not like a stranger who knows nothing about our product or about our industry. Like I've been working with them closely for years now.
Yeah. Again, it's the work almost that you have to do, obviously, all the way up to that, right? Before you ask them to post is what really makes the magic happen, and that they just know you all really well, and they obviously want you to be successful, right? Which is very hard to do if you're kind of doing a cold start and saying, by the way, can you post this tomorrow at 5 p.m.?
Yes, or can you just like the pay per post model, which I know people have had a lot of success with. I'm a little more fan of like, because we just flat rate pay our advisors because they work with us every single month. They might not post every month, but they're providing value every month. And I find that means, again, we have a little bit of a closer relationship. They are closer to the business, our go-to-market strategies. It's not just like someone who maybe has an idea, but it's just being paid to post like a templated outline.
Totally. You mentioned, of course, different people will post different things, and therefore they will have maybe slightly different messaging. Do you think about having to reach different segments, right? Hey, I think we mentioned earlier, targeting maybe users versus DMs, execs, or et cetera. How much of that do you think about that in a product launch? Or is it very much like, let's just try to carpet and wallpaper like all of LinkedIn and have them just have a buzz about us?
I think that's where having the advisors who all have different specialties is very nice, because while they might all post, I'll know like if we're maybe doing like a smaller launch, like a big launch, I will just kind of
go
faster and go big. But a smaller one, that's when I'm like, okay, this is really, particularly interesting for product marketers. So I'm going to make sure that my advisors or maybe the customers who are product marketers or friends who are product marketers, like that segment is the ones I'm really going to ask about, like posting. And I'm going to make sure I'm posting in communities that product marketers are in. So I do try to think a little bit like persona based, or just like who's going to care the most about this product.
Okay, cool. And that's for the smaller launches that might happen maybe throughout a year, or just kind of less big than big.
Yeah. Less big than big is a perfect way to put it.
How else do you call it internally, right?
Honestly,
do you call it like, this is a big launch, this is a medium launch?
We don't have, I know so many product marketers who have like, this is P0, this is P1. We're still kind of working on that.
Yeah.
But I'd say about once a quarter, like we just know we have like the big launches.
Okay.
And it might not be product marketing. Like I said, I have a report that we come out with every year.
Yes.
Like that's a really staple piece of content for us. That is a big launch.
Yeah, big. Okay, awesome. We talked about LinkedIn. And there's like a whole, if you have any more tips on LinkedIn, because that is quite frankly where everyone lives. I think there's pros and cons of that, which is like everyone lives there, which is great. But there's also, quite frankly, a lot of noise and just like a lot to get through. So maybe we can talk about that. And then, I still think the reality is like email's still email, and you still got to email sometimes, right? So any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, honestly, we just went through this with our past, again, the report launch. In the past, I've been like really over-indexed a little bit on LinkedIn too much. And I think it works, like at the beginning, if you find a channel that works really well for you, like invest in that channel, do that one really well. I don't think you should spread yourself too thin at the beginning. But this year, we did make sure to incorporate more emailing our power users, we have like a customer we call it Navattic Fanatics, but we have like
It's
a
such a good
customer
name. It's such a good
celebration
name.
group. I didn't come up with it. Talking about customers can think of something better than us. Someone wrote a G2 review like, I'm a Navattic Fanatic.
Oh my gosh, it's gold.
I know. Once we saw that, we're like, we're using that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Forever.
But yeah, so we have that group. And then we did a survey as part of this report. And for filling out the survey, you got early access. But similar with beta testing. So we emailed all of those cohorts. And I did see this year, I think in general, I'm seeing a lot of people talk about how like LinkedIn engagement is dropping down a little bit. Like our LinkedIn engagement for this campaign did drop down, but because we had a few other email channels, we also have like a more top of funnel newsletter. So, and we promoted it in all those channels. We had higher early access registrants for this report than we ever had in the past. So
That's really cool.
there's, at the beginning, it is nice to focus on one channel, but I am glad that we diversified out a little bit because it's also scary when you rely on one channel, especially as I mentioned, like LinkedIn's algorithm, it's getting more crowded. I'm seeing people's engagement go down. You don't want to be overly reliant on it for too long.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you think about email, again, like there are constraints within email, right? There's only sometimes so much you can do or fit within one email. Do you think about similar exact framework that you just shared about LinkedIn, but just kind of maybe transformed a bit and edited for email?
Yeah, I think you can often take a lot of like the why messaging from a LinkedIn post and include it at the beginning of emails. I'm actually a pretty big fan too of like really short emails and very little text.
Yeah.
Not surprising, we'll probably rely a little more on like a demo of it itself, or maybe you link out to the LinkedIn post. I've seen people do that a lot too.
Nice.
So I'll do a little bit of the storytelling, but I'd more likely like tease it and then link out to either a LinkedIn post, a blog, or a demo versus write like a really long email.
Okay. Awesome. Anything else in terms of channels?
I think the biggest thing, because I get asked about channels all the time, and I think when people think about marketing, especially founders, we think too much channel first. Like I talked about partnerships before. When I join a partnership call, so often the first thing someone asks me is, what channel should we promote this partnership in? I'm like, wait, what partnership? Like, what's the story? What's the reason behind it before we think about the channels?
Yeah.
So I would just say, first, again, think of like the narrative, the audience, the story, and that should hopefully inform the channels, right? If you're going after a certain audience, hopefully you spent that time. Also why I think beta and talking to customers is so important. Ask them where they hang out. Like it's that simple.
Yeah.
People ask me all the time how I found a lot of our advisors, and a lot of it I would talk to like customers or early potential audience members and just say, who do you follow? Where do you get your advice? Kind of that simple question of like, who do you listen to? Where do you get advice?
Yeah.
Where do you go to learn things? You'll often find the channels that work.
I love that. Here's a question that I think a lot of early stage founders really think about, which is like, okay, they've got a small team, small but mighty team, and they might have a few customers. And maybe those customers are huge fans, right? But it is still a small base. And so even when they post something on LinkedIn, they're not maybe necessarily getting past kind of that first ring or first network of people. And, you know, I think the reality with a lot of these launches, it's like you don't want to just only reach your customers, of course, but you want to reach net new people who might not have known about you, who you want to get on the radar. So do you have any advice for that, which is like, how do you break beyond just, again, your immediate network into like the second degree and the third degree, especially on a place like LinkedIn?
I do think that's not just a cop out to like, again, maybe the advisors or things like that. That's when it's really helpful if you can bring in someone who's beyond your. And talking about email, one thing I forgot to mention too that we did for our freemium product launch is we did a lot of guest posts in email newsletters that we knew a lot of like PLG people lived. I will say that type of play worked a lot better now that we have an audience. Like there were some people who now at this point that I've like just like met and gotten to know, and it was a lot easier to be like, hey, can we do a guest post versus when we first started out. But if you write like a really in-depth, again, why the narrative is so important, we documented super in-depth our process for going PLG. And that was kind of our big narrative behind that campaign of, we heard a lot of our customers say they don't know how to go PLG if they're sales led first. I've heard that from a lot of marketers I talk to, a lot of founders I talk to. Like, if you've started out as sales led, how do you then transition to PLG? And we couldn't find a lot of good content on that. So we're like, okay, we're going to write it. So we wrote really in-depth piece going over like, again, the failures we learned, exactly small changes that we made in app and why, every single phase of our transition plan. And so when we pitched this really extensive document with a lot of like pro tips and behind the scenes asking if we could feature it in a newsletter, we got a lot more responses because it wasn't just, hey, can you feature in my newsletter that we just went live with a freemium response. What I pitched them was, we heard a lot of people or a lot of our audience struggled with how to go from sales led to PLG. When we did it, we documented it to help them. Do you think this would be interesting to your audience?
I mean, I think it's so subtle. You're like, oh, well, of course you should do it like that. But it makes a huge difference, right? And I mean, I still think it goes back to like the cardinal rule, I think in general of like marketing or whatever you want to call it, which is like, you do need to provide whatever you write, like it needs to provide some value, right? And if it's all it is really pitching a very salesy thing, like people read through that, right? And so I love how you figure out a way of saying, okay, well, this is what we went through. We haven't seen anyone else cover it, right? This hopefully is helpful to at least a subset of people. And that is actually ironically like what drives the I guess engagement and the interest.
Yeah, I don't think we just have to be so literal sometimes when we're launching things. I think we have, like, there's this fear of like, oh, if I don't tell them exactly what we're launching and the exact features, people won't get it. We have to trust that, like, also maybe this ties back to if you have a good website and you have a lot of good product information on your website and they can learn more. Like, we have to trust that if they're hooked, they'll do that research.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So this is where, and I think we touch on it a little bit at the start, but, you know, I think there are founders who, if they've not really gone through a successful product launch, they think, okay, I'm going to get all my leads in one day. We've already talked about it's likely not going to happen over one day. I mean, how much, I guess, coaching are you giving a founders to be like, this is what we should realistically expect in the first week or even the second week, or maybe there's a long tail and we're not even really going to see kind of an increase in leads until a month out, right? And how you know what the benchmarks of like, this was great, this was okay, like this can be better.
Yeah, it's hard. I will preface with like this type of word of mouth marketing, it's not going to be as easy to measure as a typical, I don't know, like just let me put a UTM at the end of a link and send them there.
Totally.
But I am ultimately, as I mentioned, responsible for pipeline. And every single quarter, I go through an exercise with my head of sales and we say, you need this much quota. I need to provide this much pipeline for you to hit that much quota. And we have a little more of like a transactional sales model right now. Like a huge enterprise company that might be a little harder to do, but still we do some backward sales math. So every single quarter, I know this is my end number. So then I can break it down by week of, I need this many MQLs because they're going to convert to this many opportunities. Again, might be harder if you're brand new, but you can get an idea. And then what I will factor into when I'm doing my pipeline calculations for the quarter is what big launches do we have coming up. So I'm not going to necessarily say like this launch is going to drive 100 leads, but Q1, every single year, we do this big State of the Interactive Product Demo report. I always predict that Q1 is going to be a little bit higher of a pipeline number. So when I'm thinking about the entire year, I'm like, I know I should really put some more, you know, my goal and force into Q1 because we have some big campaigns launched. Versus like Q3, which is a slower summer month for us. We know we're not going to get as many leads, not as much attention. I can now budget that to be a little bit less because I know Q1 should carry the weight for us. Obviously, if that doesn't happen, then I have to rethink different quarters. But I do try to think of it more in like a quarter model because ideally, again, a campaign shouldn't just be a day. And then it's not like one day we launch and I'm like, where'd all the leads go? Oh my God, we failed. Because I'm just like, okay, trust the process.
Yes.
And I will be checking, you know, like bottom funnel leads, MQLs to get early signals or website traffic. Just be like, okay, are people paying attention to this? Do we need to pivot at all? But I'm generally not freaking out if all the pipeline doesn't come in one day.
Yeah. That is where I think, you know, everyone says, you know, you can't make what you measure, right? Or, you know, but I do think there is a little bit, to your point, like there is a little bit of art to it or maybe patience. And that as metrics driven as so many founders we know are, they kind of have to be okay with giving it some space.
And I will say what I find so funny about how metric driven so many founders are is the early days, every single one of those metrics is so made up. Like you have no idea.
Newsflash.
So I feel like everyone knows this, but I've done that before where I'm like, I'm predicting we're going to get 100 leads from this launch. From what? Yeah. We've never launched something like this before.
Exactly. So this is the first time, so we'll see, right?
So you just don't know. I'd rather, and you should set goals are good, but I'd rather maybe set goals of like, you know, we want to maybe like get this much of our audience. Like we want to make sure that 50% of the traffic that comes in is from our ideal ICP. Something that's not just based off of like full made up numbers. And then once you've done some launches, then you'll start to get an idea of how many typical like, leads will come in, deals. And then I think you can do some more like specific OKR based, but first time I launch something new, I really try to work more in like percentages than hard numbers because it's just going to be made up. I can make up calculations and show you them, but at the end of the day, it is kind of pulled out of nowhere.
Yeah, the percentages is a really, really good pro tip, right? Because at least they'll give you, again, the goal is to just keep doing more of it and you'll be able to, from then, benchmark, at least directionally.
Yeah, like with our freemium launch, what we were really benchmarking against was our activation rate. So how many people were doing our main activation moment, which is when they see value. Everyone has a different activation moment, and then conversion rate. So I wasn't originally judging our PLG launch based off the number of leads we'd get, but those different activation and benchmark and conversion rate benchmarks, that's how I was measuring whether or not we were successful. So I usually go more off the benchmark conversion rates than just like hard numbers at first.
That's really, really helpful. I think that's a really, really helpful, just again, pro tip to share. Okay, is there anything else that, again, you think maybe founders misunderstand or just that you would advise them when it comes to product launches and then the bigger story and narrative?
I think similar to like a launch doesn't have to be in a day. You also don't need to launch the second you release something. Like you can wait and give it some time and you can batch ideas together. Rather than feeling like, so a good example is I'm just seeing so many posts again that are just like, we launched AI this now. We launched AI this now. But rather than doing like once a week, one of those individual posts, why not once a month say, like we're doing kind of like an AI launch campaign now, and we framed it as we've been hearing, especially with how busy product marketers are in 2025, that it can take a little bit to build a demo. And we didn't just say it's faster now. We did show like, but our customers said that they still want to be high quality. Like they want a first draft, but it's not just like something they're embarrassed to show, like something that still maintains our level of quality. So we're doing a campaign more around like, okay, this is, and I was kind of the customer zero for this. I mentioned having a customer do a really in-depth playbook because now I'm moving into product marketing. I was sort of that customer zero. Yeah. And I filmed a really in-depth video of like, this is how I now build demos faster, but still with high quality, going step by step. And then obviously we'll have an interactive demo showing you how you can do the same.
I mean, I just think to your point, like it doesn't have to always be always one day, always I don't know, maybe it was a traditional way or however founders previously saw it. I mean, I remember the days, this is like really dating me. It's like you used to literally just need to be on Hacker News and Product Hunt. And then if you're like on those two, you're like, oh, that's pretty good, right? And I just don't think that's the case anymore, right?
I think honestly, early days, like the cool tech you were doing was just exciting because there wasn't as much cool tech. There's just like so much out there now. There's so much noise, which is why I think you have to bundle and make it a story. Because even if someone doesn't remember what your product does, if they can remember the story that you're presenting, when they have that pain point, they'll be like, wait, I remember that like Navattic said they do something with this and they can solve this pain point. I'm going to go look into them a little more. That's really, I think, what you're trying to do with a product launch. Just plant the seed in someone's head of like, if you experience this pain or if you've had the same use case or this problem, when you have it down the line, remember us as the solution.
I love that so much. And that's exactly what's that quote? It's like, great speakers don't leave you with like something to know. It's like how they make you feel. We'll edit that to make it sound better.
I don't know any good quotes,
but
honestly.
That is a quote.
That sounds like a quote.
It's like people only remember how you make them feel.
Yes, now I know what you're talking about.
That one. But I said it correctly. But it's like how they make you feel. And so it's like, to your point, it's like you don't need to remember each and every feature. That's actually not what they're going to walk away remembering, right? It's really that story and for them to come back to that. This has been so helpful, Natalie. Oh my gosh, this is like, there's so much more I actually even want to ask. So is there anything else that you think pro tip, hot take wise, you want to get in? Because we have a lot.
I think that you don't need to launch the day that you release something. Like, there have been so many times, I think there's always like this pressure of like, well, we need to release it as fast as possible because we need to get as much customers as possible and we need as much revenue as quick as possible. But wouldn't you rather wait like 2 weeks, just like 2 or 3 weeks later to do some beta testing, get some feedback, and then have an effective launch than doing a bad one right away? And that sounds so simplistic, but I've had this conversation so many times just because I think startups naturally, there feels like unnecessary amounts of urgency.
Always. Yeah, totally.
But it's like, we only have one shot to do this launch. I would rather do it right than rush it and then just be like, oh, that didn't really work out. Time to launch the next thing. And that's why I think we see so many like, oh, it didn't work. Okay, now we got to talk about a new AI feature and just like keep launch.
And it's just nonstop, right? And and again, it just contributes back to just so much noise. So.
And I think it also kind of positions you as not strategic, because at the end of the day, there are so many vendors in every category now. So people want to work with like a strategic partner. So if you also explain the why behind, like that's another reason why I think the narrative-driven launches are so important. If you explain the why, even if they don't have that pain point, a potential prospect's going to see that and be like, oh, this company actually listens to their customers. That's something I want out of a partner. So
that's really powerful. Again, it's like how they see you do it versus like what exactly you do, right? They see that you're going to your customers and listening to them and featuring them and showing them love and hyping them up, which is, I think, the most fun part of the journey, honestly, if we're being honest. It's like, what can we help make the customer do?
Yeah, it's also just more fun to market that way, in my opinion, versus just talking about you all the time. It's really like, let me talk about my customer, because they're more interesting than us, probably.
100%. Okay, awesome. Last two questions is, who do you think, if we could, we should interview at some point during the season?
Yeah, I'm going to give the same person that I think I told you when you're like, who's someone really smart at a growth company, reach out to her. Taylor Odell.
Yes.
And now as I'm saying that, I know her so well. I'm like, please don't tell me I just messed up her last name. But people mess up my last name all the time. So hopefully I get it. But she is also early stage SaaS. She works at Champify and just like as a small team has done so much, worn so many different hats. And I feel like also very much has a mindset of like, how can we do things strategically for the long term, not just like, let me launch a bunch of little small features at once.
Totally. And I have to thank you for introducing me to her, because we got dinner and she was so great.
Amazing.
And so more connecting and goodness to come. Awesome. And how can people follow you online? I mean, I think really for people to see so much of what you talked about, like that is, I think, what's going to be really powerful. And we can maybe do some follow-ups and share some of these like frameworks and stuff. But like getting to see you in action is a really fun part.
Yeah, I tell everyone, like, not surprisingly, it is LinkedIn. I wish I could say I have diversified my own personal channels, but really just LinkedIn. But please feel free to DM me, especially if you really just want to like organically chat and not just start trying to sell me something. Because I can kind of tell sometimes, but I am so happy to talk to anyone early stage, figuring it out. It took me a long time to figure a lot of this out. I got a lot wrong. So I feel like that's the cool part about LinkedIn. You get to meet some awesome people. So
I know. I feel like you've connected. I've always wondered, like, there's so many great people that you're like connected with. I'm like, how did you meet? Like, some of them you must have met on LinkedIn or at some point, right? Or
a lot of LinkedIn. Like, I tell my friends all the time, they're like, oh yeah, I'm busy hanging out with like my LinkedIn friends. And they're like, what? And I'm like, I don't know. The people I met on LinkedIn, right. I don't know how else to describe them. But like now we're just like friends. It feels weird to even preface that way. But that and like conferences, like meeting people in person is also so fun, because even I think for me, I post in a certain style. Like, you don't see my whole personality through a LinkedIn post. And then you get to meet someone in person. You're like, oh, that's cool. Like, I see that part of your personality in your posts. Or like, this is a little different than what I would expect.
Bodega cats.
Yeah.
Bodega cats. Okay, wait. The one last question. This isn't even going on podcast, but like, what's a great conference?
Oh, it depends what you're looking for. I mean, so I think what's really trendy right now is like the anti-conference conference. Mm-hmm. So I went to Exit 5 Drive last year, and like,
oh, cool.
That was a great conference. It's Dave Gerhardt, who is like big at Drift, and he now has his own community. And they really did, like, again, it's like small, like 100-something people, real talks and real people. You can like meet the speakers. And now I'm just seeing that model being played a lot of like the anti-conference conference.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Natalie. This is so fun.
Yeah, this was great. Love doing it in person.
I know. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.